Hi, my name is Kyle Clubb. I'm the Director of Advanced Analytics at Redapt. We help small, large organizations, private and nonprofit, in many different industries really get value out of their data investments, their analytics investments from a technology perspective, and also from a people and process perspective. Today, I wanted to talk about teams structured in an analytics mindset. How should we structure our teams so that they are most effective when it comes to data and analytics? So, from years of doing this in the past and observing different companies, I've noticed some trends that tend to work well and ones that don't. Way organizations really view data, how their people work together is extremely important when it comes to getting the value that they want out of their teams, their data specific teams. So as I look through the past, truth comes to us in different ways, and some of this is academic, but most of the time as we move through our professional careers, we don't think about the academic rules of logic. We typically don't think about works of Aristotle or try to think of law of non-contradiction, and that's typically not how humans think, although you could come to truth that way. Most of the time, the last two are how we see truth. So prescriptive means, your parents told you, don't burn your hand. That stove is hot. Most of the times we listened to our parents, sometimes we didn't. And if we didn't, then it moved to the third option, which is through experience. So trial and error, scientific method. This typically is this, let's try things a whole bunch of time and see if patterns start to emerge. So if we look at how we say something is true, that truth typically comes in three different channels. The last two are the most popular. So as I go through and as Redapt, we try to elevate organizations to get better performance. In reality, every executive in a private company, their goal is to increase the valuation of that particular company. If it's an altruistic organization like a nonprofit, they may have other goals that aren't specifically profit oriented. Whatever that mission is, whatever the goals are, data is going to play a central role in getting performance out of all layers of the organization. So one of the experiments and stories that really interests me, because there's a lot of things to digest, is something called the spaghetti and marshmallow experiment. This particular experiment was done, and it's been referenced in several books, but took a group of different demographics. So if you think of a group of kindergartners was one focus, there was a group of MBA students, a group of lawyers, and a group of CEOs. And the challenge was, we'll give you this material, some spaghetti, some tape, make the largest tower you can make with the marshmallow on top. And they have a certain amount of time to do it. Now, this experiment was done with these groups. It was done all over the world to see if the pattern hold consistent through other cultures. And it did. So the groups that we talked about, the kindergartners, MBA students, lawyers, CEOs, they all participated. And the group that consistently got taller marshmallows and did it better were the kindergartners. So if you look at that, it's not that they were more intelligent. Really, it was how intelligent their interactions were. So if you think about MBA students and most adults, the first thing they may do is strategize. They talk about what are you good at? Oh, I have a background in architecture. Okay. And they go through this sort of planning. Psychologists have terms for this sort of behavior, but basically humans, as we grow older, tend to start figuring out where we are in parent-child relationships and hierarchy and who leads the team and that sort of thing. The kindergartners don't care about this. They immediately just start grunting and putting stuff together and pointing and let me try this. There seems to be chaos. But what they're doing is their interaction is constant trial and error. They try things quicker, they fail faster, and they make adjustments faster. And honestly, the grown-ups just take more time doing things that aren't important for the outcome. So kindergartners really beat all of the groups. pretty single-handedly with it wasn't even close. So if you look at the interaction, that's important. Because if I look at analytics teams, over the years, I've seen really effective teams and really not effective teams. And it's not the technology. Most of the time, the most ineffective teams have the best and most expensive technology that you could use, whether that's in the cloud, whether that's clusters of servers in a data center, even quantum hardware. So it's not really the equipment, it's how folks interact. It's how leadership sets the objectives and the achievements of those organizations, of that group, is extremely important. So it's the interaction and how those teams are structured. So the first thing that we look at when we help organizations is we look at what are they really reporting on? What is that team structure's achievements? And we look at the organization from an achievement perspective, which is in contrast from behavior. So we really start at the top because we want it to be cohesive. A lot of organizations, we find that they have KPIs and metrics that they look at that tend to be contentious. They don't necessarily move up in a cohesive manner to really support the company's mission. So we really start at that high level. So an example of this would be a nonprofit that we work with for Make-A-Wish, which is pretty popular nonprofit. So if you look at, again, this is a simplified cohesive achievement matrix. We start at the top at the culture and policy level when we say, what is the achievement of the organization? In this case, a happier child. Now, there is methodologies to do this. It's a little bit more, I would say, more complicated. We try to stick with methodologies that can be repeatable and are easy to deal with. So we really look at every achievement and we look at 9 distinct dimensions. And those 9 are over on the right there. So those are part of 3 groupings: quality, quantity, and cost. Almost every achievement, no matter what it is, it can be scored, rated, and measured against those 9 dimensions. So as we move down the achievement matrix, we go from the culture policy levels to the strategic and tactical levels, logistical levels. So we break down all those achievements into sub-achievements, find appropriate measures. And this is a guideline used to present dashboards, KPIs, because what we find in a lot of organizations is that dashboards are presenting probably, I would say, 90% of information is not ever looked at or isn't even valuable. So it's taking up what I would say a lot of real estate on the KPI landscape. So we really evaluate what the company is measuring, and then we compare that against what they should be measuring. And a lot of times there's a big gap and we need to make adjustments. And then we also look at the way the knowledge workers are organized. Sometimes they're in FP&A and that's the only place they live. Sometimes they're in IT primarily because it's data warehousing. Sometimes it's cross-functional teams. So we look at the current landscape for the way that people are organized. An example on the bottom right is a typical Amazon example, which they used to call unregretted attrition rate. So as we looked at different KPIs, I wanted to bring up an example of one that just wasn't really cohesive. So the unregretted attrition rate was really the measure that Amazon used to have, I don't know if they still do it, where their managers would have to effectively fire a certain amount of people. Now that was just a blatant number. They expected that all managers would need to let go, basically fire a certain percentage of their staff. So even if you got lucky and had 20 direct reports that were amazing, you would be judged by whether you fired a certain percentage or not. So effectively what that meant was Amazon managers would hire with the sole purpose of firing. So if they had a team that they loved, they would effectively hire people just because they needed to fire to meet those quotas. This is a prime example of what happens when you don't go through this process to really understand what you're trying to measure and how that equates to actual achievements within the organization. If you look at analytics departments, really everybody in an organization from a data-driven culture should have an idea of basic analytics. What's better than this? How should I do this? How do I increase my own performance? So some of this really is what do I need from my professional data workers? So if you look at your analytics departments, most executives, if you really ask why are they there? They may say they're there for data warehouses, they're there for reports. That's really not why they're there. Why are the data warehouses? If you ask why enough, you'll eventually get to the real reason these things exist. And if you look at it, the top two are going to be decision making and problem solving. So those are probably the two biggest achievements that executives and the company as a whole would like from their analytics folks. So they want to have effective decision making and they want problem solved. So whether that's on a beautiful report or if it's a dot matrix printer that literally just says, please do this. It doesn't matter how pretty it is, as long as those things are achieved, we see companies perform better. So if I look at problems and I actually focus on measuring the departments, there's two things that I measure. I look at how well they help executives solve problems and then how well they help executives make decisions. And I actually have KPIs and we implement KPIs so that we know how well those analytics departments are doing. Problems typically come into four categories. So as the output of these analytics teams come out, if it is to truly solve a problem, we will frame it and say, what type of problem are we solving? So anytime you solve problems, there's only really four ways to look at it. You either work against the cause and the effect, and this is against past and future. So as analytics department help solve problems, there's usually four categories again. Is it corrective? So this would be a cause against the past. There's a leaky roof, for instance. I would take corrective action against that, potentially to patch the roof. Cause against future is preventative. So in that case, I put a bucket, water drips in there, sort of fixed it, probably not ideal. The effect, if I go against the past effect, that's what we call adaptive. In this case, we're targeting the effect of the problem, and then future effect would be a contingent problem solve. I'm trying to keep it from happening or that focus on that effect. So this is the output of an analytics team when they're trying to solve problems, and these should all be measured and scored. Decision making. Sometimes we'll see departments called decision support, which I actually like that name. So anytime an executive needs to make a decision, that could be broken down into three sub areas. What's the objectives? What's the alternatives and the risks? An analytics department should be able to allow an executive to see these things clearly to make an appropriate decision. So data's influence really helps the decision-making process to show you objectives, show you the alternatives. On the problem-solving end, deviations. So data probably has the biggest influence here, although you could use it to assess risk and other things. These three are the most effective. So decision-making and problem-solving. The 80-20 rule is really the fact that we don't need PhDs and data scientists to help figure things out. Most of the time, 80%, 90% of the time, decisions and problem solving can be done with simple methodologies against the data if it exists. So at Redapt, we help organizations implement a process. So we have a data science flow and a decision science flow process. We look at every need from an executive or from a business unit, and that's the business question. The business question could be, why are sales of my yellow staplers down 30% over the last 6 months? So we really try to create and understand and frame the business question so that we can go after the relevant data quickly. We find that organizations a lot of times will try to bring in all data, structure and mold all data, put it in a platform, yet they cannot explain exactly how they're going to use it. We would rather focus in an agile fashion against the pending important short-term mission of different groups. What's the most valuable question to ask? And we go after just the data points to get us there. So we don't want to spend a lot of time bringing and modeling data that is not going to be valuable. So the business questions are constructed in both flows. We come up with an analytics plan. This allows us an agile methodology to quickly create the data that's going to be needed to answer it, align with stakeholders, and we kick off a project. So these mini projects may be 2 weeks, a sprint in an agile team. So the project has a very finite mission, and that's to answer certain business questions. We collect that data, we use the methodologies, and really there's about 10. Almost all business questions can be answered with 10 simple methodologies. We may refine the hypothesis, and ultimately the output will come out. So these mini projects should be constantly in motion and constant value pushed out to the business. So how should we organize our folks? So we have a process that's there. We help companies implement that so that they aren't spending a lot of time really in areas that aren't valuable. How should the teams be structured? We would like to work in a more cross-functional, not parent-child relationship. So there's lots of organizations that have flavors of this, but some of the most successful, for instance, Zappos, which was acquired by AWS. At one point, it was harder to get into Zappos than to get into Harvard. Zappos had such a culture, so many people wanted to work there, and the entire organization was run in this manner. So I like to look at Zappos as an example because I interviewed the CEO, I talked to them, and I really, dug into how they organize their analytics. So they use less of parent-child relationships, more of what we call circles. These circles are constantly changing. So most of our projects in the tech world, we're very familiar with Agile and Scrum methodology. We're familiar with 2 weeks, monthly sprints. But for some reason, we don't do this in the organization. So analytics departments need to adapt quickly. Skills and roles and accountabilities and assignments have to quickly move and adapt in response to tensions of the organization. That is key because most organizations, because of the rigid parent-child hierarchies, usually don't change fast enough. And that's why you have these large-scale restructures every year or two when things become, get to a breaking point. So we use Agile Circles. This isn't, super new or cutting edge, but those Agile Circles are made up by roles. So an HR title isn't really your role. You could have 3 or 4 or 5 roles. A role can be energized or filled by multiple people. And really the roles are in response to what is it going to take to get the achievements that we're after. So roles don't necessarily equal a single person. They're like a tabula rasa, they're a blank slate. If you could reimagine the roles needed, this is kind of that process. So when we come in and help organizations, we will rethink about what roles are needed to get where you need to be. And it's independent of the people. At some point, people will fill these roles, maybe 1 person, 10 persons, it doesn't matter. But what we're doing is we're creating a framework or a meta framework to make rapid adjustments. Every role has a purpose, a domain they're responsible for, and accountability. And these accountabilities are what we would expect from that role. What we do want to iterate is that tensions are important. Most of the time, tensions are viewed in the pejorative. They're viewed in a negative context, and it shouldn't be that way. Tension should be viewed as the fuel for change in the organization, and analytics teams that are cross-functional, that are part of this system, should adapt quickly, and that adaptation comes from exposing tensions. This is tensions anywhere from a junior data scientist all the way up to a more important or maybe more vital role. All of the tensions are important, and they should all be used to adjust the circles in response. So what does this mean? It's very similar to cross-functional roles. Typically, we will de-emphasize what we call managers or parent-child relationships. Everybody really has the autonomy to make decisions within their own roles. And stuff comes in. So work is done. As the work gets done, we sense tensions. Everybody senses them. It's something that's not right. We take that, we expose that in tactical meetings and governance meetings. These are special meetings designed to really expose those tensions and to adjust accordingly. And this isn't done every 6 months. This is done weekly and bi-weekly, very quickly. Tactical meetings have a cheat sheet. Basically, this is how we run tactical meetings. It's really to expose information to the circle. We use very common cheat sheet method, which is steps. This is how we go through tactical meetings. Effectively check in. We have checklists. We have metric reviews. We expose tensions and we get tactical tensions taken care of quickly. In governance meetings, this is where we take tensions and we revise the roles themselves. So somebody may change roles, we may create new roles, change accountabilities. This is a response to tension. So it's a very strict framework in which we operate. It's not telling anybody how to run a team. It's letting the team decide through this meta framework how they can do their job better. Thank you for your time. Remember to go to readapp.com if you want further information. It's a pleasure working with our clients, any potential clients, to improve performance in your organization through your data teams and data initiatives.